Hello everyone, Steve Goodwin here with my anchor video number 139. Now, instead of a bona fide anchor test, this video is going to center on some just general real-world anchoring during some cruising that I've done here in the summer of 2022 in the Salish Sea. Now, I did get some good underwater footage of the seabed in one interesting anchorage. I'm also going to give you quite a few accounts and some images from what was happening above the water. But also, a good portion of this video is just going to be some interesting scenery and happenings that we recorded and viewed during our travels. So if you're looking for a bona fide hard data anchor test video, this may not be for you. But if you're looking for an overview of a nice summertime cruise here in the Pacific Northwest, this might be interesting. We did make it all the way up to Princess Louisa Inlet, which is arguably the most beautiful place in all of Canada. And again, got some great images, and I'll go ahead and share those along with the anchor stuff. So I started out the cruising season with a 48-pound Sarka XL number 5 mounted into the bow roller. Notice that this adds about 1 foot of overall length to this vessel, and that could be a factor if the overall length, or the max overall length of a particular slip was exceeded. So the first noteworthy place that I went was one of my favorite spots is Watmau Bay here on Lopez Island, and I like to anchor way up in the head there near that number 6 on the chart. And I didn't get any footage this season of the anchor in action, but it actually had some trouble. So I'm going to show you some past footage here several years ago with a spade anchor that was actually working very well in this spot. And as you can see, we don't get a view of the seafloor whatsoever. I did get a peek just visually at low tide this year, and I saw that there were stones, fairly large, like, say, 1 foot in diameter. And on one of the failed setting attempts of the Excel right in this spot, I could feel the anchor dragging along hard objects, presumably cobble or, the odd stone. And I can't tell you if it was the stones or the heavy seaweed that was the problem, but what the results were is the Excel, out of 4 setting attempts, only 1 did it have a full set that could hold the full reverse thrust of my boat, which results in just under 700 pounds of pull. Another one of those 4 sets, it held about half thrust, so let's call that about a 300-pound hold. And then the other 2 were negligible. One was just basically 0 holding power, and another one was a very, very marginal hold, just above idle in reverse on the engine. The other noteworthy occurrence for this initial shakedown cruise to the San Juan Islands happened at Shaw Island at Blind Bay. Panopay's Excel anchor did very well here. It set and held perfectly on the first try, but a neighboring vessel entered the anchorage and attempted to set their Fortress, what I believe to be FX37 anchor. It was no doubt a Fortress, just the size is in question, but this anchor did not have mud palms fitted. These are removable pieces of metal that elevate the crown or the heel of the anchor, and that might have been the problem. But in any event, they tried 7 times, no set. Eventually, they removed that Fortress from their rode and installed a similar-sized steel Danforth high-tensile anchor, and it set and held right off the bat first try. So in preparation for a longer trip up into Canada, I went ahead and switched out the Excel for a 66-pound genuine Bruce. Now, 66 pounds on a 7-ton boat is, by many people's standards, kind of overkill, but I can promise you that this vessel has no trouble carrying the extra weight up forward. There's actually designed ballast well forward in the boat, and it could use even a little more. So again, no trouble with the extra weight. And also notice that this anchor does not add anything to the overall length of the vessel. It's really a snug, compact fitting anchor on the bow roller. So with my wife and daughter and our 2 dogs as able crew, we set off under blue skies from Port Townsend to points north. First night was Reed Harbor at Stewart Island, and this was uneventful, very little wind, and it's a real easy anchorage. We then crossed the border the following day, clearing customs at Pender Harbor, and made our way up to Montague Harbor for a night here in the Canadian Gulf Islands. And this anchorage is quite ideal when it's not full, but as you can see here, this anchorage was full. And although I could have maybe squeezed the boat in amongst those anchored boats, I didn't want to be a pest, so I stayed off to the right there in the photo, and that's in deeper water along the channel. So we ended up with over 60 feet of water, and I was running about 2.5 to 1 scope. So this is a case where that heavy anchor and this heavy 3/8 inch chain really makes a difference. It would take, maybe perhaps almost a gale to lift that chain at the point of the anchor. So again, heavy chain, heavy anchor gives you some good options with short scope. The next day we made our way northbound through Dodd Narrows. The current can run up to about 9 knots through this narrow channel, and the idea is to wait for slack water and pass through single file. The next night we spent in Nanaimo. It was my intent to anchor at the north part of the harbor near the public park, but the anchorage was completely full, and not knowing exactly where the seaplane lanes and other traffic lanes were, we hailed the government docks, and they provided us with, I believe, their last slip for the day. That made for a very pleasant evening in the city. Now, the next day, we lucked out with a wind shift. It swung around out of the southeast, so it made for a nice downwind sail across the Strait of Georgia. That's Texada Island in the distance. Now, our goal is to make it up to Princess Louisa Inlet, which is at the end of this long fjord. Jervis Inlet is very deep, and there's not a lot of places to anchor. We did find this anchorage, which was only 90 feet deep next to Sydney Island, and we resulted with 2.1 to 1 scope, and again, a nice heavy anchor with big heavy chain made for an easy night. A small sample of the seabed did come up with the anchor the following day, and the seabed had the appearance, consistency, and even smell of potter's clay. It was a very, very heavy clay. It was sort of a blue-gray color, and I'll note that there's many rivers that feed Jervis Inlet that come directly from glaciers, so I'm assuming it was a seabed of glacial flour. That wind shift the previous day did bring about a change in the weather. We see fog and mist as we travel up Jervis Inlet, and it is precisely these conditions that motivated me to add a wheelhouse to this vessel. About halfway up Jervis Inlet, we happened upon something that you don't see every day. This is helicopter logging in action. The helicopter has a load of logs in its grapple, and it's coming down the hill there. This is a very powerful coaxial helicopter, and the cost to operate a machine like this must be staggering, but this must be a high dollar or high value product, and this pilot, of course, is just an absolute pro. He was able to make a full round trip in just a couple minutes. We saw him do this maybe 12 or 15 times as we motored by at 6 knots. And although it's a shame to see this pristine wilderness logged, the fact that they don't have to build roads and don't do any scraping of the terrain means that the environmental impact is minimized. Now, this area is very remote with no roads or other infrastructure, so the logging camp had to be brought in afloat. And we see here there's barracks, presumably there's room for ground logger personnel, pilots, mechanics, there's fuel, places to land the choppers, they've got crew boats. So it's a completely self-contained logging operation. There's another splashdown. Must have a button there he pushes and lets go of the grapple, and immediately just runs right back up for the next load. Here at the north end of Jervis Inlet, we arrive at Malibu Rapids. This is the narrow channel you have to pass to enter Princess Louisa Inlet, and the current can run up to about 9 knots here. Very turbulent, and it's a bit of an S-turn, so more than a few vessels have met their peril up on the rocks at this location, so it's best to wait for slack or near slack water. We were a little bit impatient and began our transit through with an ebb still running, but it was down to about 2.5 knots, no whirlpools or serious eddies, so we were able to motor on through against the current, no problem. Now, the Princess Louisa Conservation Area is among the most beautiful spots in all of Canada, and the day that we arrived, so did the rains. It rained for about a day and a half, pretty steady with only brief periods where we could go out and enjoy these lush surroundings. On the morning of our third day here, the clouds did begin to part, and as the sun rose up over the ridge, it revealed the place in full color. Just an amazing sight. The rain did scare away most of the people, so we had the dock mostly to ourselves. You can anchor in Princess Louisa Inlet, often with a shore tie, but we were just lazy. We have dogs, and it's just much easier to tie up at the dock. It's a great view no matter where you stay in this place. At one point, we drifted out into the middle of the inlet and took a swim. It's beautiful water. It was just under 70 degrees. It's amazing to me that it's that warm despite the glacial water feeding into it.
Woo! 4.5. What a big splash.
Here, the depth sounder was reading about 250 feet right up next to this rock wall that was actually overhanging us. Depending on your risk tolerance, you may not want to spend much time here. It'd be a bad place to be during a rock fall. Now we have left Princess Louisa and we're back southbound in Jervis Inlet. We really did not appreciate how beautiful it was when it was rainy and foggy, but boy, with the sunshine, it is truly spectacular. We took a berth at the public dock at Egmont Harbor because the current in the distance there in that channel can be very strong. In fact, just around the corner is the world-famous Skookumchuck Narrows. They are among the world's strongest tidal streams, up to 16 knots, but the day we were here, it was about half power, about 8 knots. So we could go through this in canopy, through the middle, but I cannot guarantee that we would always stay pointed downwind. Making our way back across the Strait of Georgia, we spent a night in Old House Bay on the south side of Louisa Island. It gives good protection from the northwest breezes that blew all night. However, the bottom was rocky. It's just a rock-strewn cove, and the Bruce was not firm. It was dragging and bouncing along stones and rocks. I could feel those noises grinding up through the chain and transmitting into the boat. So I decided to do a little extra anchoring here. I went ahead and attached my camera to the big 4-fjord anchor. It's 65 pounds. And those that watch my previous videos about 4-fjord anchors know that I've been sort of exploring and questioning why the commercial fishermen around here use these anchors. And I think this might just give us a bit more of a clue. What those people claim is that the 4-fjord is the gold standard for when they are on the outside of these islands out in the up in Alaska, and they have to find shelter in small little rocky coves. And the 4-fjords apparently are the best anchors for hooking into the odd rock, and they can get a night's sleep. And here I figured we had those very conditions, and indeed, up there in the upper right-hand part of the screen, it sort of looks pink, and I believe that is a granite boulder, many hundreds of pounds, maybe thousands of pounds, and we just missed hooking it. I dragged the anchor past, and it tries to hook into a smaller rock that moves out of the way just there. And then it finally gets into this clear spot and does set into this small cobble. I didn't pull the anchors too terribly hard, but it really wasn't an issue since I had both large anchors down, and winds weren't forecast to be more than 20 knots, so we slept well. Okay, I've got 2 anchors down in a shallow V in about 38 feet of water. I'm going to put out 42 feet of lead line rode, and we're tethered to the lead line with about 6 feet of camera tether. And I'm going to row it in an arc, basically a circle around where I think the anchors are. So the idea here is to just take a bunch of samples of the anchorage and just see what the bottom is comprised of. I'm seeing a small cobble, maybe golf ball size at first here, first couple spots. That's a dogfish, common small harmless shark for these waters. Now we're getting into some weeds. Now this next spot is weed and stone free. There's probably stones underneath that mud, but now we're back into more weed. So it's really quite variable. These sample shots are taken 20 or 30 feet apart from each other. Okay, that last one was right under the transom. So I did a full circle all the way around, beyond the anchors and back. Okay, I think the Bruce might be here. So for these last shots, I dragged the camera across where I thought that the Bruce and the Forfjord were, but never did find them. Didn't see any other big boulders either, so it's obviously not completely rock strewn, and normal non-Forfjord anchors will probably do just fine here. But I can see the message that those folks up in Alaska are saying. If you really have a rocky, bouldery type bottom, I can easily see how that's super strong, and two-pronged Forfjord would be just the ticket. Okay, pretty much dragged it straight across the bow, right over where I think the anchors were. On our way south, we spent the night anchored in Clam Bay. That was uneventful. We did make the dinghy ride through the cut over to Telegraph Harbor for a nice dinner in the restaurant, and we spent quite a nice evening here on Penellicut Spit, easily the nicest beach that we found for the whole journey. The last anchorage we'll talk about is on Wallace Island. It's called Princess Cove, and as you can see, it's a very narrow little harbor, and the standard here is to stern tie to the rock wall there. It allows far more boats to be placed into this real narrow cove than if they were just swinging on their anchor. Now the trouble with this is when you get wind blowing down the harbor, it blows broadside on the boat, which increases the force on the anchor, but even more so, think of it like a tightrope walker. When a tightrope walker is in the middle of his line, the force on the line is far, far greater than the weight of that tightrope walker, and the boat is just exactly the same way. And if you've got your shore ties nice and snug, it's going to put perhaps an order of magnitude more force on the anchor. For example, this small sloop ended up dragging or blowing right into us. It wasn't a big deal. We put out some fenders, and the folks returned from their walk quite surprised that their boat had moved so far and was lying on us. Now, what they were using a 22-pound Bruce copy, and as we know, Bruce copies are only about half the holding of the genuine anchors in many seabeds. And in addition to that, they had very little chain and not a lot of scope. So it was no wonder they dragged into us. I went ahead and used our power dinghy to help them reset their anchor, and they got squared away just fine. But it does just go to show you that a stern tie is not a foolproof way to anchor in stronger winds. Okay, I hope you enjoyed those images from our cruise, and also hopefully you got something out of those anchor happenings. Now, straight off, I need to say that those extremely short scopes that you saw me using, that only works when you've got two conditions, and they are very deep water and an all or mostly all chain rode. For you folks that cruise in very shallow areas, hopefully you were looking cross-eyed at that 2.1 to 1 scope where we spent the night. You cannot do that. Doesn't matter how heavy your chain is or how big your anchor is. 2 to 1 scope just does not work in shallow water. What happens if it's shallow, you just don't have a lot of weight in the chain, and the wind starts blowing, and immediately that chain straightens right out, lifts up on the anchor, and out it will come. The same would occur in very deep water with a mostly rope rode. There's just not a lot of chain weight, and it'll straighten right out. Again, it'll pull up on the anchor. But I can promise you, even in that anchorage near Sydney Island at 2.1 to 1 scope, there was no chance that that chain was going to lift at the point of the anchor in anything near the forecast winds. So again, that's perfectly safe, deep water, all chain rode only. Now, another result of being in very deep water with a heavy all-chain rode is that the need for an elastic snubber is greatly reduced. Now, for those that don't know, if you have an all-chain rode, it is often, in shallow water, a really good idea to use a snubber, and that is typically a piece of nylon line that has a lot of stretch, like a rubber band. It's fitted to the anchor rode or onto the chain. The other end of this, say 20, 30, maybe 50-foot long piece of line is belayed on the boat, and then you ease the windlass chain out so that all the load gets put on this snubber, and the snubber again can just stretch like a rubber band as the boat hunts or surges in waves. But in deep water, heavy all chain, the gravity pulling down on the chain has a droop, and that acts as a shock absorber. Things would have to get pretty serious, like up into close to a gale, if I was in really, really deep water, before I would need to fit a snubber, and that's exactly what I would do. But for that entire trip that we made, and including this anchorage right here, no snubber installed. In fact, I cannot remember the last time I used a snubber aboard this boat. Now, another reason to use a snubber, regardless of how deep you are, is to relieve the load from the bow roller. There's many bow rollers that are sort of light duty, and they are designed only to handle the loads of lowering and raising the anchor. The actual load that's put on the rode while you're anchored is supposed to be taken up via a snubber and then often led through a hawse port and belayed on a strong cleat. So that's another reason to use a snubber, but there again on Panope, it's all metal. I've constructed a bow roller that is just really, really strong. It's more like a commercial workboat kind of setup, and there's no trouble leaving the rode over the bow roller up to, I mean, a hurricane. There is no limit. The anchor chain would break before the bow roller deformed. There is one other reason why a snubber might be a good idea, and that is to relieve the anchor load from the windlass. Most windlasses are not designed to take the full load of the anchor system. They're just for raising and lowering the gear. So again, a snubber can relieve that, but another way to do it is with an on-deck chain stopper, and that's what I have. It's always used whenever I get the anchor set, the stopper goes on. And in my case, it's just a heavy chain hook attached to a welded hard point or strong point on deck with a strong Dyneema soft shackle. Last thing I'll talk about is that anchorage at Old House Bay on Lasqueti Island, and the way that the bottom was so variable. We saw mud, cobble, giant boulders, and on and off really thick, heavy weed. And I think what the takeaway there is that you're just going to have a big anchor there. I really don't see how you can pick a high-performing anchor to deal with all those kinds of variabilities. There's some folks out there that are advocating using very, very high-performance anchors in very small sizes, and I don't see any problem with that when you know you have a good, clean seabed, a seabed that you know that your anchor is going to work well. I've done it, proved it in many other tests where there's some very small anchors that can produce tremendous holding power, and you could anchor a boat like this with a 20-pound anchor and it would be just perfect, provided you knew that the seabed was of a consistent, known consistency that works for that anchor. But as we saw in that Old House Bay anchorage, you don't know what you have. It changes. Just move 20 feet and you go from one thing to another. And again, I really don't see a solution for that other than just a big anchor. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this travel-oriented anchor video. In the future, I'll get back to more bona fide anchor testing. And as a result of this video, though, I can think of a couple tests that I really need to do. One would be to go back to Watmau Bay and find out what was going on with the Excel and why it was having trouble setting. And the other is to go back to Shaw Island with a Fortress and a Danforth and do a shootout there, because as I've mentioned in this video, there was that unknown boater that just could not get the Fortress to set, and the Danforth worked first try. All right, that's it for now. I appreciate you watching. If you want to donate to these causes, I've got links to Patreon and PayPal down in the description below. As always, anchor safely. So long.